I think healing for me looks like emotional prosperity.
Okay.
When we think of prosperity, we typically think of finances, money. But your emotional prosperity is the key to your emotional wellness. So for me, that's me pouring into me, being kind to myself, repeatedly forgiving myself, nurturing myself, really practicing self-care, having hard, honest conversations with myself, even the difficult ones. Uh, uh, Seeing things as they are, not as I really want them to be, but making room for them to be a certain way down the line. You get what I'm saying? So healing for me is it's not rooted in one thing. It's me working out. It's me loving on myself. Actually, I'm just learning to say these things out loud to myself. You know, my
Mhm.
how can I say this? How I really feel about myself is just starting to catch up with who I am right now
Mm.
because of
Mm.
these positive self affirmations. You can, we've all looked the part, and it's one way or the other. You have the accolades, you have the degrees, you have all these different things, but that don't mean that's how you really feel about yourself. I'm just getting to a space at 54 where I can really look at myself and say, I love you, guy. I'm proud of you. That's taken me some time to say that out loud. But of course, you can imagine how many uncomfortable conversations I've had to have myself just to get to this place of healing. But honesty, me just being honest about everything that I've been through and admitting that though I've experienced some of these things were not my fault, but some things did happen to me. And it's okay. How do
Mhm.
I move on from that? And so, I'm okay with having that conversation with that little boy repeatedly over and over again, just to uh, maintain this space of healing.
So it sounds like really that acknowledgement of the inner child, of those things
Absolutely.
that have happened to you within our lives. Yeah, Phil.
This idea, I don't even know if it's a such thing as healing. Where I am in 2020, the same way I don't think there will ever be justice, right? I look for accountability. I don't necessarily look for justice in situations, because when we talk about justice, we're talking about for atoning for centuries of atrocities committed against the people. And so when I think about this idea of healing and how it relates to historical trauma and present day trauma, I don't necessarily know if we'll ever be able to heal from all that we've experienced. I think it's the idea of we learn how to better navigate it. It's funny. I was working with a client, and I like to call it coaching, even though it's therapy. I was working with a client yesterday, and he's a chemistry PhD student at Penn. And I was just like, I didn't even know they existed. I knew they existed, but I didn't know I would ever talk to one. And he's trying to get over a breakup. And so for the last month, he's been, having these negative thoughts, these self-defeatist thoughts. And so what I had him do, he had a chair next to him. I had him pick the chair up and put it on his lap, right? And he put it on his lap, and had him continue the session with that on his lap. And at the end of it, he was like, well, what was the point of that? And I'm like, for a lot of us, right, when we have these negative experiences in life, some of us can't look past that chair that's happened a long time ago, that's been in our lap. We can't look past those experiences. They continue to come up. But for some of us, the goal is to get to the point where we can acknowledge that the chair is there. The chair is always going to be there. I know Tyrone personally; those experiences Tyrone has had will never go away. Right? It happened. Now, how can we better navigate it? And with that, what comes with that is understanding our emotions. Right? Being able to manage our emotions and understanding how they impact our thoughts our mood and our behaviors. And so for me, that's what this idea of healing, look like. But again, I'm at the point now where I don't even know if it's a thing, if it's a real. I know it's not an end goal because we'll never be fully healed, but I'm just my relationship with this idea of healing has changed drastically, and I'm trying to figure it out as
Right.
we speak right now.
Yeah, and I think that you bring up a really good point there, that healing is really personal, right? We have these multiple levels, whether it's an individual level, but then we also have this community level. How do we heal, and what comes first? The individual, the community, or the individual. And we have so many different ways of approaching that and answering that question. And I think that we've also raised multiple points as well of, we have to identify what we're healing from. And if we're talking about these racial structural racism, these race-based traumas, I struggle as well myself with that conversation. How do I heal, meaning being completed in this healing process, from something that's still happening, right? There's no beginning, middle, and end. This is something that is still happening. And I think it brings up really great points around how do we change? How do we, in ourselves, um, maybe what's the words that I'm looking for? Combat the narrative, right?
Yes.
So even thinking of Sankofa, the idea of not being afraid to go back and get what was lost. So we need to go back to our past to reclaim that, to acknowledge it. So then that way it protects our future and shifts our present condition. And I think healing is part of that entire trajectory, which is what everyone here is talking about. Another really important question that I'd like to raise as we talk about, knowing all of these barriers, right? And recognizing that healing wasn't always something that was accessible for Black and Brown people here in this country. What does it look like? Or what ways have you found to create spaces that promote healing, those love-centered spaces, in spite of our present conditions? So in spite of the structural racism, the poverty, lack of education in our systems, health disparities, how do we still create healing spaces for our communities? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it really sounds, just being vulnerable and showing up in a space, right? And I think that kind of takes away some of those ideas that healing is this very specific, modulated approach versus just showing up
Yeah.
for folks. Yeah, some other ideas. How do we create these communities of healing? Yes, Naya.
Well, it had started when I founded People of Color for All Bodies. We had just went to different spaces. I own a yoga studio. We were there. We were at Inside LA a little bit. We were on Pomona College. It just kept moving depending on where I moved. But now with COVID, it started with another woman to kind of expand. And we started with a Juneteenth 24-hour yoga celebration with people of color all over the world because we wanted to get everything covered. So I just reached out to everybody, found these wonderful women in South Africa, found some who were Zulu, found a multiracial Aboriginal woman in Australia, and that was the beginning, right? And people showed up with very little promotion. We had hundreds and hundreds of people come on. And then we went for July 4th, like July 4th. That's not a great time as a Black person. You know, we want to look at it, like decolonize that. We did a town hall, like what's needed? What do we need to do as health and wellness people? What's missing for Black people and brown people? So I had that. Yeah. And then on Labor Day, we did another 12-hour offering, but this time also with people talking and yoga and meditation and conversations about Black people in labor and the unions and the lack of diversity and everything. And we've just been, my partner and I, through Yoga Jubilee, we've just been putting on these events with people were coming for free, but then we raised money and we were able to pay everybody for every event. Yeah. And people are starving for it, for community, for things to do, to connect, and to work on healing.
So it's really recognizing what the need is, us naming it, right? Being able to name what it is in our community and being able to show up and provide what folks need. Shashina, what are your thoughts around that?
When you asked the question, I realized I had never considered healing in spite of anything, right? For communities of African descent, I guess I just always, there's no question, we have to heal, we have to restore, we have to replenish, we have to put back. And so that is a centering of myself, not a centering of whiteness or white supremacy or the other. Like, this is not in spite of you, this is for me. This is for our community. So, similar to what Naya said, that there's healing in everything. Now, I do believe that it's important to do things with intention to bring about greater levels of healing, but we heal all the time, especially when we have, you know, Naya talked about people just came together and then things happen. So even without agendas, we're healing each other, right? We've always had ritual, we've always had community, we've always had spiritual practices, and these things have always lend themselves to allowing us to heal our communities, even if we hadn't had a formal space, a building, a therapist, insurance, a certification. We've still had all these other things in place that have allowed us to restore, put back, and replenish. And so, yeah, our healing is for ourselves. I don't heal in spite of. I heal in order to thrive as a community.
Absolutely. Tyrone, what are your thoughts?
Kind of like piggybacking off of what this sis said. You know, I think she was a spot on. I think these spaces are out there. For me, seeking these was more reflective of myself. I know how you feel about yourself determines how you treat people. And so I had uncomfortable feelings that I had to be honest with. I struggle with anger. I struggle with emotional intimacy. I had all these other issues. And so for me, I didn't know how to talk to people. So I started talking to someone. And then, you know, as a male in general, we're not given the space to even be vulnerable. So you can imagine how uncomfortable that was for me as a man to even try to be vulnerable. But as a result of that, I realized once I started talking about how my trauma impacted me, I'm a survivor of sexual violence, emotional abuse, and physical abuse, all in the same time span from 6 to 16. So you imagine all three of those things happening to you at the same time. Imagine how I thought of myself. Imagine what my identity looked like to me. So once I realized how these things were showing up and impacting my relationships with my kids and how that trauma damaged my marriage, I felt like, well, I know there are other people out there like me, so I got to start talking to someone. So I started talking to people, and you know, I met people like Phil. You know, I met other people similar to Phil who had these spaces, or males in general who just wanted to talk. So, you know, for me, everything with regard to healing comes back to being intentional about your emotional wellness. what does that emotional prosperity look like to you? What do you want it to look like to you? So for me, I'm intentional about not just making sure I'm okay, but the people that I love and I care about in my community are okay. And we can only create safe communities by having these courageous conversations. And, being courageous also means being vulnerable. And that's not easy for us as people of color.
Absolutely. I think you also really bring up a good point too, where when we're talking about vulnerability, I think Naya said in the very beginning, showing up in your skin can be a scary thing. There's those
Absolutely.
microaggressions, this race-based violence. So how do we reach people in our community who are afraid? When we're talking about living in a society where you feel hunted, right? How do you show up when you have that fight, the fight or flight, responses that are coming up? I'm now afraid. And is it fair for us to then put the onus on people who are in survival mode? Because when we're in fight or flight or freeze, we're in survival mode. So should we be putting the onus on people who are in survival mode to then also seek mental health supports and to be vulnerable? How do we address that? Any thoughts around that?
I mean, one of the reasons that I had I have the People of Color Yoga for All Bodies, and now I have some groups that are just Black centered, like the Alzheimer's class that I co-teach with my friend Z, who's also a yoga therapist, is Black centered, because there are things that can happen in that space that we have on Friday afternoon that's Black centered, that if other people were there, it wouldn't happen. Like, we wouldn't be able to talk about those things. So I think we really have to have affinity groups and places where we can be amongst ourselves, whatever that group is or how you identify. Because when other people come over, and also in a white supremacist society, the white voices often take over. And that's why I remember years ago, I went to a restorative yoga workshop for race-based traumatic stress, and it was open to everybody. And it ended up just being a lot about white tears. And it didn't have to do with it forgot about Black and brown bodies. So when I was in that group, I said, I will never do that, because it's just that in a white supremacist society, white people take up a lot of space. And even us as Black people, I see it myself, I'm always deferring to them. Like, it's so ingrained that I have to comfort a white body that it sort of gets in the way of our own healing. So that's why I really think we have to have spaces, not every space, but we have to have times that we come together as Black people, as Black and brown people, maybe as Black, brown, indigenous, whatever those groups are, that they're really important. And then I also wanted to say one other thing with healing is it's also, to me, very important, the ancestor healing. Because of epigenetics and all these ancestors that are in our body, like, we have to work with ourselves, but we also, I believe we have to do practices about working with the ancestors who face so much trauma, because they're inside of us, we're carrying them. And until they also get safe, we can't feel safe. That's my belief.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So really being able to center experiences. And when we're looking at that and even looking at intersectionality, how do we reach a population that we're talking about who have been directly impacted by the criminal legal system, where trauma and their experiences and their responses to the trauma are criminalized? How do we form spaces of healing that aren't punitive? Any thoughts around that?
I guess I want to kind of address both if I can hold all of it in my head. Around fear, I'm still trying to figure that out as well, right? Like, what do we do with all of the fear? And so the things that I've done and what I share with my clients and what I encourage is, like, first naming it, like, I am afraid. And I think this collective acknowledgement, or even in our individual relationships and our friend groups, being able to talk more like, this doesn't feel good, I'm afraid, I'm scared. And or also talking about homicidal ideation and suicidal ideation. Like, these are very real parts of our reality, but they get tucked away. And so being able to bring them to the table and start to name them, I think is really important. And in addition to
Mhm.
naming, like with anything, not with anything, but I feel like we just need so much more care, so much more nourishment, so much more holding. And so really thinking about fear is like, how do we hold each other in this recognition that we are in fear? And then as Nai said, how do we draw on the strength of our ancestors to recognize that even if we feel isolated, we feel alone, we are not actually alone, and that we do stand with many. Part of the reason I started my practice was to help people recognize you're not alone in what you're experiencing. There are many of us experiencing the same types of feelings, the same types of thoughts. We've normalized a lot of the same behaviors. And so I think with fear is bringing it to the table and speaking more about it, that I can be powerful, I can be in your face, I can be demanding things and still acknowledge that, yes, there's fear here. It is very present. And it's a part of my reality.
Yeah.
I think about, like, I have a record, and it still feels weird to say that I have a record, even though it happened. I'll be 37 this month, 18 years ago, right? And it was an event that took place that was, had to do with systemic racism, and it was traumatizing to me, but it happened, right? But it happened. And I think now where I am is, for me personally, I had to first forgive myself, right, for responding the best way that I knew how in that moment in time. And then doing the necessary work. I had to recognize that there had to be some accountability there for whatever my actions were, whatever my behaviors were that landed me in that situation, despite all of the external influences that took place. When I used to work with, children and families a lot, and I'm working with these young black boys, because why? Because I'm a black therapist, so of course they're going to give me the black and brown boys. And we see the trauma. I'm looking at the trauma that's taking place and they're experiencing on a daily life, on a day-to-day basis, and trying to engage parents who themselves don't necessarily understand their own trauma. And I would have to be
Mhm.
frank with these teenagers and say, listen, this is the game, right? This is the game, right? You're going to have to thrive, is not only survive and thrive. It has to be in spite of these individuals who might not understand. They may never get it, but your wellness is your responsibility. And I understand that it's going to be difficult. I understand that it's going to be hard. Again, we make space. I make space for you. Speaking truth to power, letting you know what my experiences were and how you can navigate this journey and potentially come out better than you were, right? And where you are now. But again, it's, being gentle. It's not being punitive with our words and with our thoughts. And it's really, and we're
Mhm.
talking about it, recognizing the humanity in another. I think that's ultimately what it boils down to, is recognizing the humanity in another. Me personally, like we all see on Facebook so many stories that pop up, right? And I always think about, I have no idea what led them to get to this point at 28 where they needed to take somebody's life, where they didn't value their own life and they didn't value somebody else's life, right? And so it's having that level of empathy, right? And recognizing all the
So,
factors that can impact one's wellness and how they show up.
so that empathy and humanity has to be present in all facets, depending on it. It doesn't matter what the person's experiences are. Really being able to show up in that wholeness and fullness. Tyrone, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was Phil kind of took the words out of my mouth with the humanity and empathy piece. Because for me, I think that's missing in the Black community. We have these social norms that are celebrated that I think are very harmful to our very existence. We operate from a place of rebellion or all these other things, and we think in the Black community, these things show up. Disrespect shows up as being cool. I just had a conversation with someone the other day, actually at a poppy store. He thought he was being disrespected, and I asked him to define disrespect. And I said, well, did this gentleman really disrespect you, or did he hurt your feelings? Because they're two different things. I said, because if we're being honest, maybe there's some things in you emotionally that are just fragile. So, and we have to be honest, where it's white fragility is not just a thing, black fragility is a thing. Fragility in general is a thing. We're all fragile at the end of the day if we're being very honest with ourselves. So I think, just helping people to kind of articulate or understand what they're really feeling versus what they think is popular, and help them uh, respond in a more positive or more effective way, can be very helpful. And that takes time, because I find myself doing this more often than not, simply because for lack of figure of speech, I'm at the scene of the crime. There was a part of me that used to just get really irritated by some of this behavior. But now I'm realizing, if they were anything like me, they had a missing dad. I have neighbors, a 22 and a 20-year-old, who don't know the first thing about anything. And so now I've taken on this father role. When I tell you they're the neighbors from hell, they are. But I've been intentional about going the extra mile, reminding him to keep his front clean, reminding him to be mindful how you look when you walk out the door, how you treat yourself is reflective of your self-esteem. So I have all these other conversations with him. And he just told me the other day, he said, thank you for having those conversations. He said, the thing you do that nobody else does to me is you talk to me. You never come at me. Now, the old me would have came at him, because Lord knows I wanted to choke him, but grace has to be extended. You know what I'm saying? Empathy has to be extended. Kindness has to be extended, because he looks like me and he's old enough to be my son. You get what I'm saying? So I know what it's like to not have anyone give me real guidance, at least from a strong man. So I'm intentional about how I'm showing up, to not be their father, but to just be a friend, to be a positive influence in their life, hoping that when they walk out today, they can process something that Mr. T said to them. You get what I'm saying? He just paid someone to cut the grass. I normally cut the grass. He said, I wanted to surprise you, so I got the grass cut. That made me feel good, because that's a series of conversations that I'm having with them ongoing.
So I think one of the things that I'm hearing from everyone as well, that I think should just be named, in order to be healers, and hold space for people, we need to do some of our own exploration and healing. As mentioned, the old you would have responded in a different way. And I think we don't always give enough space when we're talking about healing, as been mentioned before, about degrees or certifications, that when we hold these space and that intentionality, that needs to come from our own space of grounding, our own space of recognition, vulnerability. And that's a journey. It's not always an easy one, but it's something that we ourselves do, because we hear that adage of hurt people, but healed people heal communities. So as we're able to reach back and hold spaces for others to heal, then we're creating additional healers within that as well. I wanted to ask, do we have any questions that have been posed for the panel?
Hi, Jackie. Yeah, I want to check in. First of all, I want to let you all know that you're making an awesome impact on the audience. We're getting wonderful comments as well as questions. So this is for Phil, actually going back to a point, Phil, that you made. One of the viewers is asking, can Black therapists help non-Black clients heal? And conversely, can white therapists help Black clients heal? Is effective healing racially specific and separate? And Phil, this is directed specifically for you.
I'll say that. So the client that I was referencing yesterday was a white gentleman, and again, this commonality that we have, and clearly we have some differences, as far as how we grew up, but at its core, right, it's this desire to be loved, it's this desire to be heard, and me really working on the commonalities that we have, and being understanding and mindful. In a reverse situation, it will take a hell of a therapist, right? A hell of a white therapist. I'm rewatching Girlfriends right now, one of my favorite shows, and it's it's oh man, it's just wow. But Joan is seeing a white therapist who challenges her, who pushes her to reach a higher level of self. I think there's a certain level and I hate the term cultural competency that needs to be present, but it has to be there. I've had white therapists who weren't culturally competent. I've had black therapists who couldn't relate to my experience. And when I say relate to my experience, just who I am as a black man attempting to navigate this world. So for me, and I'm other people differ. I think it comes down to a lot of factors that must be in place. There must be an acknowledgement of privilege and bias that exists before I can ever start, thinking about you potentially helping me. But if it's either go to a white therapist to start, or not do anything at all, I'm gonna say go, and then I'm gonna say continue to it's like it's like dating, right? Continue to look around and find you a therapist that will help you reach whatever goals you have identified.
Mhm.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Bill. Jackie, I also wanted to tag on another one that just came through. I think this ties back, Naya, to a comment that you just made. This is a little lengthy, so bear with me.
Okay.
An anonymous attendee says, I live in a local community where there's an active Facebook group, and frequently people post reparations threads and invite people of color to post their Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, etc., and urge white folks to give individual money as well. This is being billed as reparations and is said to promote healing. While I'm aware that people of color have been marginalized and actively disenfranchised systematically and personally since before our country was a country, I also believe that sometimes money can go a long way in people's lives. I'm wondering if this type of activity is considered a form of healing. I'd be interested to know, and this is actually directed to all of you, how you all see opportunities like this fitting into the fabric of healing. But Naya, since you talked about these spaces, and especially when you were talking about them being exclusive to people of color, but yet sometimes being overtaken by others who are in attendance, if you don't mind starting to address that, and then everyone else can contribute.
Well, I know the events that let's say when I did the Juneteenth event, there were classes that were only for BIPOC population. And then there were classes that were open for all. And then people could contribute to everything as a whole. So I don't know about, like, when I'm listening to the question, I don't know about just like Venmoing individual people as a personal reparation. That seems kind of weird to me, but I do believe that in giving money to organizations that are reputable, help them provide whatever mental health, yoga, meditation, whatever the practices that help people of color. Yeah, I mean, I believe in that. But the other thing, I don't know, I would need some help about just saying like, here's my Venmo, like give me my own personal reparations. That's kind of what it sounded like to me. And that sounds a little bit fishy. If I don't know if I answered right. Maybe somebody will help me.
I think you did answer that. I'm curious to hear from everyone else too, because I know that one of the things that we have to be conscious of is in these spaces sometimes there is manipulation. When people of color come together, under the umbrella of healing, there's also opportunities, for things to become misaligned. So I definitely agree with you, Naya. I have been seeing some of those things on social media myself. I think the talk or the focus needs to go back onto, like you all are saying, us organically creating our own spaces. But yeah, this was somebody who asked that, and I definitely agree that does sound a little strange. Who are these people who are asking for money? Where is it going? And this again, the need for us to create our own strapping. So, and there's another
Yeah,
comment
I mean,
before you guys finish up. We're about 30 minutes, 20 minutes or so still left, but I also want to share with you all a comment that just came through. A person says, it's wonderful to hear these experts talk about still working on themselves and not having all the answers and not need to. This is so important. So I just wanted to share the impact that you guys are making as you all are having this discussion. Jackie.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to just throw that question back out of, how are people feeling about funding of these healing spaces? Because financial barriers is a real conversation. Oftentimes people aren't able to afford and access healing space therapy, yoga, and the like, without insurance or without the ability. But when we're looking at our most marginalized communities, that then separates them from that space. How do we address that?
I'll just say everything
Are
I
there any
always do is donation based, but that's why I have to work so many jobs. It would be nice to have the funding, but because I feel like I have to make a difference and offer things, I just always let everything be donation based. And a lot of times I don't get any donation. And a lot of times I've rented spaces and lots of people say they're going to show up and nobody shows up. And I've ate the cost of it. But it's okay because it's what I want to do. There have been times when I just walked away from a lot of funding from an organization that was run by white people because then they wanted ownership of everything I did and they wanted to control things. And I thought, okay, I guess I'll just continue to have all my other jobs because I don't want to give away my ownership or be dictated to. So for me, it's been sticky. The reason I have to do a lot of other things to make a living.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of like what we're talking about with this healing and also within ourselves. So if we are being pulled on all these multiple places and spaces in order to survive, in order for our financial health, how do we then show up full? What are some ideas about how do we get funding for programs that are here for the community that need to be there without us being burned out?
That's a
Additional
big one,
thoughts?
Jackie.
It is, and I struggle with that myself on a regular basis.
I would just say,
I think that's.
go
ahead. No, go ahead, sis.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. I would say just
Okay.
going back to, is that healing? Going back to the definition I offered earlier, that there are levels to this and that it puts something back. This puts something back and so it could be a form of healing. Should you rely on this as your prominent source of healing? No. I think that, giving money is an energy exchange. And so I'm more interested in the behaviors behind the person offering the money than the dollars you're putting in my pocket. So I can see, giving individuals money as a form of healing, but I think we need to look at the larger picture of who are you? What is it that you represent? You're giving me $50, but if you're causing harm in other areas of the world, I don't actually want that $50. That's an energy exchange. I don't want that. So when it comes to funding the work that needs to be done, no, Jack, we have to get really creative because we're asking essentially starting to ask the same people who we want to create these resources for the funding. And so I think, this idea around imagination, getting really creative around how we're sourcing things, even exchange of services. Okay, I may not be able to give you money, but can I exchange a service? Can I offer some form of barter? Considering, getting there's this idea that people of color, all Black people, are broke. That's not true. That is not true. There's a lot of money out here to be had. And so starting to cultivate communities where you might not be on the front line, you might not be participating in an event like this, but you have the capital. And so how do we find the person who can connect with that person who that conversation? I may not be that person. I may not even want to sit in that conversation, but there's someone is. And so being more intentional about trying to figure out where the money's coming from is important. Getting creative. Yeah. Those are my thoughts.
Which is difficult if you're a therapist and this is your income. Who's going to be able to pay for the services? And like you're saying, being creative of where we.
Jackie, I have a
Tyrone, do you have a thought around that?
No,
Did we have another
sis
question?
was no,
Mhm.
sis was hitting
But
it
I'll stop.
spot
Go ahead,
on.
Tyrone.
The only thing I would just add to it again, uh, she said most of what I wanted to say, which is cool, but I think we have to understand the importance. I think the giving could be a blessing depending on how you're looking at it. Let's be honest. We all have gifts and talent, right? Some of these things can only be used uh, through additional financial resources, right? If someone is giving money to you from a good place, it's okay to receive that because guess what? You do have to invest in other things to share your resources, because you are giving something in return. But I also think there are creative ways uh, to generate income. I think we have to invest in each other. Investing in each other means, okay, I'm gonna help you get to what it is you're trying to do. Maybe this month, right? We'll do a fundraiser on behalf of you. Our services are similar, but they're different, right? We can, again, there's this thing in the Black community that uh, we don't, there's that crab in that bucket mentality, right? That is still real, that is present, right? But I think we can help you unlearn those behaviors by just having an honest conversation with them and letting them know the value of investing in each other. Because as sis said, for those white organizations that wanted to money her, we had an agenda. Not that somebody else who's giving money won't have an agenda. Agenda matters. Is it the agenda benefiting, or is it benefiting the people of the community? So I think you have to be honest about what you want, what you need, and it's okay to you don't want to be afraid to ask for what you need. I can't speak to the reparation part. I'm not going to just be taking it because I think I'm owed it. Yeah, we're owed a lot of things, but I think there's a right way to generate income and still have community impact on people.
Absolutely. But as I'm listening, and it's a tough conversation, but I think, especially if we're looking at the intersectionality of the conversations today, the legal system, people who have
Can't hear you.
all of these things, people are hurting right now. Can you hear me now? Okay.
I can hear you.
Okay. Don't know what happened. But yeah, people are hurting in our communities. So I guess I have a couple of just quick comments about it. I think that we should also be careful about the crabs in a barrel, right? When we're talking about people who are surviving. People didn't, Black and brown people didn't create this environment where they're trying to survive. So really being able to be mindful about that and being mindful, I think, as well, when we're talking about financial security, when, the Black community has 1/10 of the wealth of white families, that we don't overall have all of those resources, and how we can be creative to look outside of just the people that we're serving to be able to support that in other ways. Do we have time for any more questions?
Actually, we are, first of all, you guys are, as I'm looking at comments, you guys are really lighting fires in the everyone who is listening. We do have time for one more question because we're actually down to about 15 minutes or so. And so the question someone is asking, which is just, wow, this is an amazing question here. Please discuss how an adult in a family can influence the young people in the family to seek healing, because the adults are also willing to seek it. Who would like to talk about how we lead family members? Tyrone.
I think you lead by example. I think you lead by example and admit that, hey, I don't have it all together. So we have this thing in the Black community when trauma happens, we say what happens in the family stays in the family. We don't talk about it, and we sometimes sweep things under the rug, right? We don't realize that by taking that approach, there's going to be generational curses that might come from that. There's going to be other behaviors that get attached to that, things that get perpetuated that could be more harmful to the family in general. So for me, I admit that listen, one of my sons is listening on this. And one of the things that I did early on was responsibility for what I didn't do right as a parent, right? I I listened. I went back conversation with each one of my kids and asked them about my behavior. If there's anything you could change about me, et cetera, et cetera. What was it? I took what was being said to me and I became proactive in getting help. And I think me being a man, particularly a man of color, and saying that I don't have it together, I don't always have the answer. I'm not always at my optimal best. I am hurting. I am all these other things, but allowing them to see me vulnerable and creating that space makes someone else say, you know what? If he can do it, I can do it, because I feel like vulnerability and accountability work hand in hand. You have to be accountable. You have to admit that something happened. Uh, you have to be vulnerable in a sense, and share your story. Sometimes we've learned to live in our shame. I've lived in my shame most of my life. I'm over that right now. You know what I'm saying? So I'm in that space where I'm storytelling, because I think my story can help someone else and help my family as well. And I'm also unafraid to hold people in my family accountable for things that might be hurtful to someone else in the family. So I think you just have to lead by example and hold people accountable and love them at the same time. Extend the empathy, but just lead by example. I do everything by example. That's where I'm at, because I think that's important.
Yeah.
Can I just wanted to
think that's a
speak.
great response, Tyrone and Phelps. Mhm.
No, I was just going to say, having worked with children and families for a very long time, I mean, outside of leading by example, right, is being mindful. Not if we're talking about therapy in particular, right, we got to be mindful not to weaponize it, right, to where it's this idea of you have to see somebody because something is wrong with you,
Mhm.
right? That's going to be a turn off to especially when we're talking about a child, a child or an adolescent. They're going to be resistant to that. Be mindful of the language that's used. Come from a strengths based perspective. When if you're trying to be encouraging, right? Don't address it from a deficit, but address it from a strength. When I talk to people, about therapy, it's not. I don't look at it because it's something wrong with me, right? Yes, I have depression. Yes, I have anxiety, and lived with it for a long time. But I desire to thrive. I want to. It's not only for when things are going wrong, but it's also when things are going great. I want to be able to have an open and honest and real conversation with somebody who's not going to judge me, right? And so I think it's this idea of how we frame it, especially when we're talking about children and adolescents. And listen, they're people, right? I think a lot of times, and this goes across racial, ethnic, across race and ethnic boundaries. We're talking. People look at children as being their vanity projects, right? And that's how they treat them. They don't look at them as being their own individual person with their own thoughts, feelings, and that impact their behavior. And recognize the time might not be right. Right, the studies show that it takes 10 years for somebody to truly work on their mental health. If we're talking about black and brown folk, I'm sure that number is a lot higher, right? It takes more years. And so we have to be patient. We have to be consistent and recognize that, if we want somebody to have a conversation and they're 14, they have 14 years of life's experiences impacting how they show up outside of the external and biological factors that they're experiencing. So again, that grace, that empathy, and being consistent in how they're showing up to have that conversation.
Yeah,
Thank
and I
you
think you
so
bring
much
up a
for
really
that,
good
Phil.
point, even
Mhm.
when we're looking at age, when we're talking about especially the neurobiology of how we experience emotions and how we show up in the world, that prefrontal cortex, that idea of how we see the world, how we're able to conceptualize the world, how we're able to plan for our future, that's really not fully developed until we're closer to 25, 26. So we have to, as a community and as parents, be mindful of that. And then the one I'd like to piggyback on how we heal especially as examples, when we look at ancestral healing, when we're looking at that race-based historic trauma, when we heal, we actually heal 7 generations back and 7 generations forward. And to be able to really name that and recognize that, because as we heal and we show up as a parent very differently. We also show up as a child to our parents very differently. There's a really clear ripple effect that happens.
Right.
Powerful.
Jackie, thank you so much for that. And guys, this is, as I figured, we need so much more time for this conversation. I'm looking at what's coming through, and people are really appreciating what you all are sharing right now. This is the last question, and this is where we'll end this. And this is actually piggybacking on what Phil was just saying. So the question is, what is your advice to a young person being the first to break generational curses, but is the outsider in the family for doing so? I'm a first-gen college graduate, 24-year-old, third-year doctoral student. Please help.
Wow.
Yeah, I think the most important thing and the first step is to find community. Trauma happens in isolation. Healing happens when it's witnessed, when it's held, when that space is sacred. So I would say the first thing is to find some community, whether it's in the school or in another some other way, whether it's a professional, whether it's just a group. We've heard about all of these multiple groups to be able to continue to show up for yourself and have support while you do that.
I want to say too that
I'm sorry, you can go ahead. I was trying to grab the guys before we timed out. But yeah, go ahead, Naya. My apologies.
I just wanted to say, because a lot of you are talk therapists, but no, I taught that doesn't only live in the prefrontal cortex. So you can do like body work, yoga, meditation, massage, all these things to work on the trauma. It doesn't only have to be like talking about it. So just know that, that those are there for you too. I'm done.
Yeah, absolutely. And just with that too, just as a note, I'm not actually a talk therapist. I do body-based modalities. So like with me, I'm art therapy, play therapy, EMD, brain spotting. And I agree, if we do a top-down approach, there's an issue. We need to do the bottom up, really starting with our bodies and how we're feeling and taking in the world.
Wonderful.
I can just
4 minutes. Any of the guys or anybody else want to chime in for the 24-year-old?
No, what was the question again? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Phil.
Can you repeat the question?
So basically, he's saying that this 24-year-old is asking for help. He's the first of his family to break generational curses. He's in college, is doing well, but he feels like an outsider in his own family because of his commitment to healing.
Yeah,
If I can add to this conversation, I would say that first, kudos to you for stepping outside of what you're recognizing is not working within your family. Like Jackie said, find community, find like minds. You are not alone in this. There are many young people who feel this way. Like I was this person, I'm first generation, whatever it is, whether it's the type of career, whether it's a lifestyle, whether it's a religious belief, there are many people who feel this way. So find community. And also I would just encourage you to think about this narrative that there's maybe some responsibility for you to rescue these other adults within your family. Care for your family, love them, meet them where they're at, where you can, but notice, if there's this tendency to feel like I have to do these things for these adults. Yesterday, I told my daughter, let the adults take care of the adults, right? We cannot rescue people cannot save anyone but ourselves. And so continuing to do what you are doing to take care of yourself truly makes a huge difference in your family. Sharing your story, going back to the comment before, is a great way to help people understand why you do what you do, which is more likely to bring them over, right? Versus telling them what to do or why they should be doing it. Kudos.
Absolutely.
Ditto.
Absolutely. Thank
Ditto.
you, everyone. I know, right? I feel bad because I don't want to end this. First of all, thanks to all of you. As we are closing out, I just want to share this quick comment that just came through, and then I want everybody to plug themselves very quickly. This comment that came through is asking us, please do a part 2. We love hearing everyone speak and interact together. Guys, I will have to reach out to all of you again. We've got to do this again. So thank you so much. Very quickly, if everybody could just go plug yourselves, your organizations, and what you do. How do people get in contact with you? How do we continue conversations if someone wants to join a men's group, someone needs therapy, someone has been a victim of sexual abuse, experiencing trauma? Please tell the community how they can get in contact with you.
I guess I can start.
Anybody can start.
So I am Phil.
Oh, go ahead, Phil. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it, brother. Thank you. Uh, you can. I'm on all social media platforms at Phil_Roundtree. So you can hit me up, especially to the young brother. I'm a year, well, this is first semester doctoral student. So I might need to talk to you, right? Again, it's about finding community. Shoot me a message on there, or you could go to my website, www.quadify LLC. That's Q as in quail, UAD as in dog, EFY LLC.net. It has a link to my email, and you can shoot me a message on there.
Thank you.
With regard to anything sexual violence, if you're one of those men that are still struggling, and you feel like you need to have a conversation off on the side, my name is Tyrone Melvin. You can reach Tyrone at WOR.org, or you can inbox me on Facebook. That's probably the best two ways to get me. I can't give out the number, but you can email me. That's probably the best way to catch me, and I'll return the email to you.
Thank you. Naya?
You can reach me on my website, through my website, artyogafusion.com or yogajubilee.com.
So if you are interested in being in community with me, I'm definitely interested in being in community with you. You can visit my website, goinginward.com. You can find me on Instagram at goinginward. You can also join me every Monday at 7:20 p.m. for mindfulness meditation. That is the 7:20 meditation. I think those are all the best ways. Or you can just email me, peace@goinginward.com.
Awesome.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Shashina. We love having you. Jackie?
Yeah. So again, I'm Jackie, Sankofa Healing Studio. So you can reach me. I'm on Instagram, Sankofa, SANKOFA, Sankofa Healing Studio. Also, Sankofa Healing Studio is a nonprofit that provides therapy, individual and group therapy, along with workshops to the community, especially those that are impacted directly by the incarceration system. And also looking at racial trauma, healing from racial trauma. So Sankofa Healing Studio, you can email me at Jackie, JACQUI, at Sankofa Healing Studio. And also for any additional, any other therapists who are interested in looking at EMDR and brain spotting, I am putting together a group in Philadelphia now so that we can expand that trauma-based response for our community.
Once again, thank you to all of you, not just for being here, but for the work you do. You are greatly, greatly appreciated. Again, I look forward to doing this again. These part 2 requests are coming in as we speak. So we definitely will make sure that we have this conversation a second time. And then peace and blessings to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you. Thank you for the work that you do. And until next time.